Hello and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host Rob. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at prophecies and divinations and foretellings, things of that nature, and how to add them to your game to make it, just more interesting and compelling and rich. And this is going to be more of a Dungeon Master video, but first I want to apologize. It's been a while since I had a video because my phone has been giving me all sorts of problems. The camera has not been working. So I've had to borrow one of my wife's parents' phones in order to try this video with that. So hopefully everything goes good. The settings might be different, but whatever. Also, it's all in Vietnamese, so I can't really change the settings. So, whatever we get is what we get here. So what you have, oh well, whatever. So anyways, I personally really like using prophecies and dream sequences and things like that. I think it's a really interesting way to build intrigue and anticipation and a sense of mystery or wonder as for what's going on with your game. Now, I know there's a lot of people who don't really like it, or they've maybe tried it once or twice, and you had your big prophecy and then the players just didn't go. And now your game is completely derailed because they just decide to screw you over or whatever, right? That kind of stuff does happen. But my main advice would be to keep things very vague and use a lot of symbolism. So a great example is from the Matrix movie, the first one at least. I don't know, I haven't seen the new one yet that just came out or is just coming out, whatever it is. But Neo's told to follow the white rabbit. Doesn't really know what that means. Then he sees that girl with the shoulder tattoo with the rabbit. And he's not really even interested in going to the club. But then he sees that and he's like, oh, clue. And then he goes, right? Now, maybe your players roll a 1 on their observation roll and they don't even notice there's a white rabbit. If you have a hard deadline of when this was supposed to happen, you're in trouble. But if you don't, it's no big deal. You can just move it or rearrange it or do something else. You could have it be an actual white rabbit. You could have, whatever else you need it to be. But just because they bombed that time doesn't mean you can't move it somewhere else. And by keeping things vague and using lots of symbolism, it can start to mean almost anything you want it to. And that's one of the real strengths, I think. So I wanted to give some examples from mostly from my own campaigns and how I've done it. But I think if you look at any fantasy literature, prophecies and whatnot is pretty much a staple of almost any fantasy series, right? But one of my favorites, because it's my favorite fantasy series of all time, is the Wheel of Time books, not the show, which has had some serious issues. But whatever. In the books, though, you have characters who have prophetic dreams. You have people who go through different portal stones that lead them into all these alternate worlds where they see glimpses of possible futures or pasts even. You have one character who sees different images around different people, and she doesn't know what those images mean, but it's usually very vague and full of symbolism. But one of the cool things about it is as you read the books, trying to figure out what these things mean. So at one point, the one character, just to give an example, she sees him with a falcon on one shoulder and a hawk on the other. She doesn't know what it means, he doesn't know what it means, whatever. But then later on, he meets a girl, young woman, whose name translates in the old tongue to falcon. And suddenly he's got a pretty good idea what the falcon actually is. It's, of course, this woman. Later on, he meets somebody whose personal symbol is the hawk. And things start to really take shape, And a lot of her prophecies and foretellings were things of this nature. But by keeping it vague, it adds mystery without revealing too much. Because I don't really want to give away things to my players necessarily. I'm trying to increase the mystery and the intrigue and build that sense of speculation among the players, right? So anyways, I will give you some examples from my own campaigns. One of the best examples I ever had, I ran a game called Shadowrun. And for anybody who's ever played Shadowrun, for anybody who's never played Shadowrun, if you've played it, you know what it is. But for anybody who hasn't, basically the idea is that it's in the future, but the Earth goes through these phases, basically based on planetary alignments and stuff like that. And at different phases of Earth's history, magic is actually a thing. And so in the future here, the magic actually comes back. And so just like we used to have magic in the past in their game, we had elves and dwarves and orcs and all that stuff, which was based on like our actual world history in the game setting. In the future, the magic returns, but this time it's in like a very technologically advanced age as well, because we still have all of our science and technology. In fact, it's slightly better because the game takes place in the 2070s in the current editions. I think it started in the 2050s in like the first editions. I could be wrong. It might have been 2060s. But either way, things kind of started, in the fairly near future. And so we have things like cyber limbs. We have things like, androids and stuff. We have smart guns and all sorts of cool things like that. But then we also have magic and spirits and elementals and things. And in that game, wizards and shaman types, they can reach like an ascended, level of enlightenment. And it's called initiating. And there's a bunch of different stages of initiating. And whenever my players initiate for the first time, and sometimes other times too, but specifically in the first time, I like to have like a cool idea of what I want to do with it, make it a really special scene, because they're like going on this big kind of spirit quest thing, right? And so I want to have something neat for that. So my one player, when he had his first ever initiation, I decided to have him see glimpses of the future for the campaign. And at this point, they'd been playing for a little while and things had kind of started to take shape. And I didn't really have like a set storyline, but I did have some big events that I kind of figured might happen. And one of them was the almost inevitable conflict with the Russian mob. That the campaign itself took place in Poland and Warsaw, and the players had kind of made friends with a bunch of the Polish mob. But the Polish mob and the Russian mob were obviously leading to a complete collision course, and the Russians were moving in on the Polish territory, and it just seemed pretty apparent to me that given the trajectory of the campaign, this was going to be an issue. So I already knew the Russians were holed up in this old medieval castle, but of course they'd repaired it and retrofitted it with all sorts of high-tech security systems, and they even had some magical defenses as well, although the Russians are more about the high-tech stuff. They were a little less on the magic. But anyways, so in his vision, I knew that there was like a secret entrance into the castle, but the Russians also knew there was a secret entrance into their castle, and so they had booby-trapped it. And so I thought it would be funny if the players went through there, and then they set off like the booby traps, right? But I also thought it wouldn't be fair to like have them just, obviously get insta-killed. That would be terrible. But also if it was like no warning. So this is one of the reasons I wanted to put this in there, because I thought I could have this like super serious like instant death trap, but because the players know it's coming at some point, they don't know when, they can actually be prepared for it and have a strategy. So in his vision, he sees them all creeping through this like underground passage, and then he hears this like electronic beep, and it's not too loud, but he hears this beep, and he looks up, and there's an explosion, and the roof collapses, and he sees himself reaching up with his hand to cast a spell, and then everything was black. And one of the other players at the table was like, you need to learn the physical barrier spell immediately. And that's what he did, and that's how they dealt with it, which was a great plan, by the way, and it worked. But because they didn't know when it was or where this scene was, they had no context for it. He just knew that at some point he was going to be creeping through some sort of underground passage, hear this beep, and the roof was going to collapse on them. And, like I said, it ended up being pretty cool, because when it started actually happening, they started figuring it out pretty quick. Holy cow, this is that scene, And so I like that. It gave that sense of like forewarning, but also foreboding, and built a lot of anticipation. I had a bunch of like generic stuff in his dream sequence as well. Just him like casting spells and fighting stuff or healing his allies. And none of that was anything specific. I just knew that during the course of the campaign, they would fight stuff and he would probably heal people, right? So, that was pretty basic and generic. But the other one, which was probably my favorite one, was towards the end of the vision. He sees himself, and he seems to be like in a spaceship, and he's like strapped into his chair, and he's got a spacesuit on, and he looks over at the chair next to him, and there's a woman sitting there, and she looks back at him and kind of smiles, and then she like looks away again. And he doesn't know who she is. He's never met her in the campaign, but in the vision, he feels like he knows her and trusts her, and he feels kind of familiar with her, right? But they weren't really too interested in who she was. The players were really interested in why the heck are we going into space? Because space in Shadowrun is still pretty dangerous, and magic doesn't work very well in space because the magic in Shadowrun is kind of like tied to the life force of the Earth, right? And so in space, you're a lot less close to the life force of the Earth. And so they were kind of like freaked out about that, and they're like, why are we going into space? Like, what the heck's going to happen, you know? But then as the campaign went on, just to explain things really quickly, the players were basically, I mean, all Shadowrunners are basically terrorists, but these players were actually, their characters were members of like a terrorist cell. And there was an NPC named Duncan who had recruited them, and he would give them missions. He'd be like the Charlie to their Charlie's Angels, I guess you could say. And then they'd go out and perform the missions, right? But this was just one cell in a larger network. And in one of the missions, they actually ended up basically conference calling with Duncan's superior, who was a woman named Min, and she was the one who had recruited him. Oh, by the way, Min I took from Min Donner from the Gap books, not from Min from the Wheel of Time books, which we just mentioned, just to clear that up. Same name, different character entirely. Anyways, so they start talking to her, and of course the player who has the vision instantly recognizes this is the woman from the spaceship. And now players are like all excited about this again, because they're like, what the heck? Like, this is Duncan's boss. Like, why are we going into space with her? Like, whatever this mission is going to be, it's going to be like pretty big, right? It's got to be really important. Like, why would she be coming with us? And once again, it revealed a little bit that, yeah, you're going to be going into space, and you're going to be going to space with her. But the payoff to me is that the players are all like so excited about it, and they're talking about it, and they're speculating, and they're running all these theories, and they're bouncing things off each other, and it just creates this like elevated sense of anticipation for when these things actually happen. And instead of like being a spoiler that ruins the campaign, instead it's more like a really, really good movie trailer where you just really want to see what was that, you know, and you want to see what happened, right? So that's how I kind of look at this stuff. Anyways, some other examples from actual D&D campaigns, not really visions or prophecies, but again, this kind of in that same boat, right? I ran a Lovecraftian horror D&D game for my players called The King in Yellow. Although to be fair, The King in Yellow actually predates Lovecraft, for anybody who didn't know. Lovecraft just kind of adopted it and brought it into the Cthulhian mythos. But anyways, The King in Yellow is this like elder big bad thing, kind of like Cthulhu. And he's both lives in and is like trapped in, I guess, like his base/prison in this city called Carcosa. And Carcosa is this place, like it's this other dimensional city where people sometimes go in their dreams. So from the beginning of the campaign, I didn't want to overdo it, but on a couple occasions, I think about 2 or 3 times, the players would end up going to Carcosa in their dreams. And it was always really spooky because they always had this sense that they were being watched, and I'd make them roll like observation checks and stuff, and no matter what they rolled, they never saw anything. Although like if they rolled really high, then they might like turn around and they think they just catch something moving out of the corner of their eye, but they never actually see anything, and they just have this sense of like kind of paranoia building, right? And like I said, they go there several times each throughout the campaign, except for Troy's character, who was an elf, and elves go into a trance. They don't dream, unfortunately. But everybody else got to go there during their dreams sometimes. And then at the end of the campaign, when they actually have to like confront the King in Yellow and stop him from escaping, they actually travel to Carcosa in the flesh. And so now they're physically there. And because they've been there a bunch of times in their dreams, and there's all this like kind of spooky stuff going on there every time they're there, again, you just have this heightened sense of anticipation. And it doesn't feel like it's completely out of the blue. They're like, oh man, Rob's been setting this up since the beginning of the game. Like, and they know now there's a master plan behind it all. Quote unquote master plan. Anyways, another thing I wanted to mention briefly is another example of stuff that comes up a lot in D&D along these lines was from the very beginning of my King in Yellow campaign. So we talked about the ending with them going to the city, but the first thing that happens almost is they're asked to solve a murder. And this young woman who was a powerful warlock, but she was in an insane asylum. By the way, she was in the asylum because she also went to Carcosa in her dreams, and she'd removed the King in Yellow's face mask and had seen his true face, and that had driven her mad. Just a little side bar of information there. But anyways, so they need to solve her mystery, the mystery of her murder. But her room, where she's kept, is completely warded against magic because she's a powerful warlock. They don't want her to escape. They don't want her to hurt herself or others, you know. So you can't really do magic in her room. So like, well, how did somebody get in, kill her, and get out? Like, if they could teleport in, maybe, but they couldn't teleport out again. So like, how did this happen? So the players start doing their investigation, and I knew in advance that one thing they were very likely to do, because one of the players had Speak with Dead, was that they would cast Speak with Dead on the dead girl. And so I made sure I'd gone and read the spell a couple times over just to make sure I was familiar with how it worked and its limitations. And I saw that they get 5 questions. The answers are usually cryptic, which means I don't have to necessarily give away everything, right? And you can only cast a spell on the same corpse. I think it's once every 10 days or 14 days, somewhere around there. So I didn't have to worry about them just casting it over and over and over again, right? They're gonna get 5 questions. I made a list of like the 10 or 12 things that I thought were most likely to be among those 5 questions, and I had answers for them all written down. And obviously one of the questions was going to be, who killed you? That's a very obvious one, right? And so the players cast a spell, they ask her that question, and she responds, the Weeping Man. And the players are like, the Weeping Man? Like, what the heck does that even mean? They have no clue who this is, right? But they start trying to figure out everything else. They find some drawings of hers that she'd made, right? And these kind of give them clues to some locations, but nothing really directly to this, right? They start interviewing different guards. They start establishing a timeline. When was she last seen alive? When was she found dead? They start trying to figure out who it could be and narrow down their subject or suspects. And they think they've got it narrowed down to this one NPC who is this bard. The problem is they don't have any hard proof, and they've kind of run up against a brick wall. They don't know what else to do. But then one of the players is like, you know what? There's one place we haven't gone yet. We haven't gone to his room at the inn. And so, sure enough, they kind of lure him away. They actually end up kidnapping him, actually. Whatever, let's not get into that. So they end up kidnapping him, and they decide to search his room. And sure enough, underneath the bed, they find this duffel bag, and it's got, you know, clothes and everything else in it. But among other things, wrapped up in this like cloak, they find a white porcelain mask with a single sapphire teardrop under one eye. They had found themselves the Weeping Man. And some of the other clues were similar things like that, right? But because I'd read the spell and knew that it was very likely the players were going to cast Speak with Dead, why wouldn't they, right? They've got the spell, they're trying to solve the murder, that seems like a good plan. And because I didn't want to just hand them the answer, I'd gone through, read the spell, and came up with the questions I thought were most likely to be answered, or asked, and I built that into the plot. I thought, well, what if he knows that she could have Speak with Dead cast on her? Maybe he should wear a mask, because he actually knows her, and she might, you know, identify him, right? That's no good. So that was one of the things I built into the story. And then because the players are able to solve this on their own, there's this huge payoff. It's not like they didn't roll a natural 20 on an investigation roll or whatever else, right? Or on an arcana roll. The players sat down, bounced ideas off each other, ran through different possible scenarios, kept coming up with ideas, ran into brick walls, kept thinking of more ideas, tried those ideas, and eventually got to the right solution on their own. And if they wouldn't have gotten there, I could have given them hints and helped them along, right? I don't want the whole campaign to stall out in Act 1, right? But because I didn't have to do that, and because they were able to figure things out themselves, like to this day, they still remember that as being like one of the greatest campaigns ever. Especially Act 1, where I think we literally had like one combat, and it was like 12 hours of just investigation, role play, and you know, it was just awesome. And you know, to this day, that's one of the best campaigns I've ever run, and all my players are like, yeah, that was like the best game ever, pretty much. So, you know, that's the cool kind of things that can happen when you take the time and effort to kind of build this stuff into your game, plan for it, come up with ideas that, you know, for what kind of things you can get, and, you know, questions and answers and that kind of stuff. And then, you know, the players feel like so much more rewarded than just rolling well on a dice. in my White Spire campaign, I'm not going to go into a lot of details. We need to keep things moving here. But one of my players, I asked him what I was the bard, and I asked him what spells he'd taken because they just leveled up, and he said one of the spells he'd chosen was Legend Lore, and I was like, Legend Lore, like, what the heck? Like, A, I have no idea why he chose the spell, but B, I should probably do what I did with Speak with Dead. I need to sit down, read the spell, come up with things I think he's most likely to ask about, and, you know, have some answers for him. But the nice thing was, I was able to give them some plot threads that they'd completely missed and had never done anything with. Because now he's asking about like weird information, and this gives me an opportunity to give him those answers in the setting of the game. I'm not just giving them to him for free. He's actually had to get the spell. He's casting the spell. And so it gave me a chance to introduce some subplots that they, you know, hadn't done anything with, as well as to give him answers to things that he was curious about. And again, just because I knew that he was taking the spell, and because I took the time to prepare stuff for it, it ended up being really, really rewarding. So this is really what I'm trying to make clear in this episode, is that it is going to take more preparation as a dungeon master if you want to have prophecies or dream sequences that lead to different storylines or whatever in your games. But it also makes your game so much better because the players feel so much more invested. It's way better than just, you know, killing their 600th goblin or whatever, right? They're actually like figuring things out themselves. They're working together as a team and using like ideas and bouncing things off each other. And personally, I love that kind of stuff in my games. So my final part I want to talk about is if you've never really used this kind of stuff in your game before, or maybe you've used once or twice, right? But it didn't work out. And like I said, like you had your big, you know, on the 11th day of the 12th month at the 13th hour, you know, the lightning bolt shall strike the tree and the person who witnesses, blah, blah, blah. And then the players just don't go there or whatever. And then you're like, yeah, that was the whole central theme of my campaign. So that'd be my advice. Don't make it the central theme of your campaign. Build it into like one of the side quests or something like that, and start small, right? A lot of campaigns, you have things like fetch quests, right? Like video game style. You know, you need this NPC to give you some advice or some information, but they're not going to do it unless you go retrieve item X, Y, Z, you know, or Z. Sorry, Americans. You know, whatever, right? One thing I like to do is just kind of get rid of some of those quests every now and then. Not all of them, you know, but maybe I change it because I've already read through or I'm designing my own campaign or whatever. And I'm like, you know, it'd just be cooler if I had the players fulfill some sort of like prophecy. And like not a big one, right? But like they go to this NPC and he's supposed to send them to go find something for him. And instead he's like, well, I will only tell the information to the person who can move this rock in my field without using their hands or you know, animals or anything else. And they're like, what? It's like, yes, I had a dream that the person who could get this rock to move itself was the one that I would reveal this information to. And now the players are like, okay, so we have to get the rock to move by itself? Like, how do we do that? Then they start looking through the spell list and someone's like, hey, you know what? I've got animate objects, or I've got this, or I've got, you know, what other, I've got telekinesis, or whatever other method, you know? And now, again, it's not players like just killing something to retrieve something or making an arcana roll. It's the players sitting down, looking at what they have available, and figuring out their own solutions. And I personally love that kind of stuff. I find that it's much more rewarding for the players, and it's often more rewarding for me as well. So, like I said, you know, just do like a little prophecy like that and build that into a side thing and, you know, start small, right? I would also advise people, like, I think that as far as ways to introduce prophecies and stuff, there's a lot of ways because it's Dungeons and Dragons, right? One of the most tried and true is just have an NPC come to the players and say, oh, I've seen this dream or whatever, right? And have an NPC give it to them. That works fine. But often funner, to me at least, is to have one of the players be the recipient of this prophecy or, you know, revelation of whatever sort, right? You have the diviner wizard, like it's literally right there in the name. They have an ability at level 2 called portent, where they sometimes see glimpses of the future. So doing like a cool roleplay scene where this player sees something that's coming up, I think that's perfectly appropriate. Obviously, clerics and to a lesser extent paladins are great vehicles to receive divine inspiration from some sort of like angel or deity or whatever, right? I think druids getting commuting with nature and spirits and things like that, or even beast spirits that might appear to them, right? I think that's a cool idea. And you could do it with a ranger as well, but druid's probably better, obviously. Um, I think warlocks, like we already mentioned Lovecraft earlier in this video, but if you look at like 90% of Lovecraft stuff is somebody finds a book, reads it, never should have read it, bad things happen, you know? That kind of thing was fine for a story too, for Dungeons and Dragons, right? Maybe your player even has this book and like, you know, or finds it and is like aware of some sort of like dark prophecy or something else, or the rise of some great old one that they need to stop. You know, that makes for cool campaigns. And you know, if the players are directly involved and they're the ones receiving this sort of like inspiration or vision or whatever, it just makes them much more connected to it. Now the player feels like it's important to their character, and you know they've automatically got that bond with it now because they got this cool vision or prophecy or whatever, right? And like I said, personally, I think this kind of stuff could really make a game just a lot more interesting. You can introduce like different plot elements. It adds a lot of like mystery and intrigue, and also kind of like hints at things that the players can start to get interested or excited about. And I think that this kind of stuff just makes the campaign, you know, even better. So that'd be my advice to you. Keep things fairly simple if you're not used to doing this. Keep things vague. Use a lot of symbolism. Oh, another advantage about using vagueness and symbolism is that literally you could always change what it means. Like if you think of something better later on, and you're like, oh man, I should have had like the symbol of the tiger be this thing, you know? Well, you still could probably, you know? There's always a chance you might be able to change it. Now maybe it's already happened and now you're locked in, right? But if it hasn't happened yet because you've foretold it early enough, you can change it. Another thing, and this has happened to me once or twice, it's not a common occurrence, but I've had times when my players are all like spitballing ideas and talking about things, and whatever they came up with, I'm like, that was brilliant. That's actually better than what I have. And then I'm always like, oh, how did you know? As I like cross out all my notes and start changing everything that I'd written down. Oh man, you guys are on fire tonight. Wow, great job, guys. You know, and I just completely steal whatever their idea was. And now they're even more excited because they're like, oh man, this was brilliant. Like, A, Rob was brilliant for thinking of it, and B, look how brilliant we are for figuring it out. And meanwhile, you know, it's just them being brilliant, actually, not even me. And, you know, I've done that kind of stuff before. Why not? A lot of times, you know, they're just not right. My idea actually is better. So then you just kind of steer things along, or you just don't say anything. You just wait until things play themselves out. And, you know, to me, that's one of the funnier aspects of the game. I love that type of feel. I love kind of like anticipation of stuff and just seeing that, you know, what you'd kind of built up pay off later on. And I really love that kind of stuff. I've done prologues in different games before, you know, and it's kind of like the prologue of a book, right? I'll like narrate a scene. It's usually fairly brief because I don't want to bore my players, but it reveals stuff. But it's also like just the scene out of context. So it's like reading the prologue of a book that you've never read the series yet, you know? You read the prologue and you don't necessarily know who these people are, what's happening, you're not even understanding everything, but hopefully it's kind of cool and it gets your interest. And, you know, it's the same thing with your players. They don't know who these people are necessarily. They don't know who, you know, what these events are, but it gives them some sort of like just a little taste, and hopefully that piques their interest enough that it, you know, just starts to build that anticipation and that speculation. And anyways, that's everything I have. So thank you for watching. Feel free to like, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications. No point hitting the dislike button these days because YouTube basically nerfed that. So feel free to not do that. And most importantly though, leave me your comments in the comments section. I look forward to reading them. I'd love to hear about people's experiences of using prophecies or figuring out a prophecy in a game that you thought was like really cool and it was like you know, a kind of a big moment for other players or whatever. Or even if you're like, you know, I've tried using prophecies and it's never worked out well for me, but hopefully I've given you some ideas or some inspiration at least to like maybe try it again or whatever. And, you know, if so, then I feel like my job's been done. So anyways, that's everything. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.